How's everybody doing this morning? I'm just waking up, having my morning cup of coffee. They're scraping the snow off the parking lot. Anyway, I just thought I'd come on and do a bit of a follow up and shoot the shit with y'all. Now, out of everything that went on yesterday, gave me an idea. Robin's helping Jen try to dox me using my status card. Now, when I first came out and showed my status card, this group of women, well, they just went out of their tree. It upset them because they could not believe that somebody was claiming to be First Nations and had lighter skin. And like the racist little bitches that they are, they have just hung on to that like a bone. And I get a lot of people do not know or understand what being First Nations is. And it's complicated. And why would you? I mean, if you're not First Nations, it's not going to be applicable to you. You're not going to be educated in it. It's just like if I was talking to a Mormon, I wouldn't know what the criteria of being a Mormon was. So I thought I'm going to come on and explain a bit of it to y'all. So here we go. Basically, before United States and Canada were ever here, they've carbon dated it here in Canada to being able to prove 14,000 years prior to Canada even being Canada, First Nations people were here. And back then, there were no borders. People migrated. So if you go back 600 years, people migrated, like First Nations tribes migrated. So they had areas that they would go to hunt in, they would have areas they would go to vacation in. That's how they lived. They didn't have one house in one spot. Some of them had homes where they farmed seasonally in. But anyway, there was a complete system. Now, when I talk about America, I'm talking when First Nations people talk about Turtle Island. They're not talking just about United States. They're talking about North America. Turtle Island is our name for North America, not Canada, not United States. So what ended up happening was, first I think it was the British that came over and they wanted all our land, and then the Pilgrims came over. There were just so many people from other countries, immigrants, that's funny when I say that came over from other areas wanting to call this land their own. And of course, our systems were we were tribal, and we had a chief. That was like our governor or whatever. So what the other countries did is, they came over and said, listen, if you let us have this, this, and this, then we will give you this, this, and this. And in the very beginning, we didn't even know what the fuck they were talking about. We didn't even have a word in our vocabulary for a borderline or a house or property. In our religion, the earth is basically God. That's what we take care of. There's no, oh well, the south or the west or the east or the north. We don't, It's the earth, the total earth. And everybody that lives on it is God's God's people. So anyway, let's fast track a bit. So as time went on, and these treaties were signed, our chiefs signed them. They didn't know what they were signing, and they gave away land without even knowing it. So really, those treaties are not legal, or are they binding? But then as time went on, and I know it's going to hurt your feelings, but it's fact, and Europeans were coming over by the boatloads, we were a little wiser. And we started saying no, to certain things they wanted. We would not sign their treaties. And they knew that. These governments knew that. They knew that we were now getting smarter. We didn't trust them. And we were not willing to sign anything. Basically, we didn't know what the fuck it was. So that's when things got really rough. That's when things got, if you don't sign, we're going to kill you. So the first big thing is the word Indian, calling us Indians. Well, that's actually about the same level as calling a black person the N-word. We are not Indians. I'm, for instance, part of Ojibwa. I identify with being a Ojibwa. There's Cherokee, there's so many different tribes. There's tribes all over North America. And that's including down in Mexico. The reason we got called Indians is because Columbus took a wrong turn and thought he landed in India. And so he just named us Indians. We didn't choose that name. It's the same as the white Europeans called black people the N-words. That's not the name we chose. That's a name that colonizers chose. They chose the N-word and they chose the Indian word. But a lot of people don't realize that. We understand that. And if you go back generations or whatever, even when you get on the reserve, we'll joke around and call ourselves Indians. But is it appropriate for other people to? Not really. Do I lose my shit when other people do it? No. It's just growing pains. So anyway, these treaties were signed, and then, like I said, the governments realized that we were no longer as stupid as we were, naive. I guess that's a better word. And so they systematically committed genocide on us. And then wrote us out of history. So, for instance, land in the United States, a lot of it was developed in farmland. It was being farmed by First Nations people. They completely write that out because they wanted us to be savages. That we didn't have a system. Absolutely, we had a system, and one that worked. Not a perfect system, but we have one that works better than our current governments today, and that's Canada and United States included. We didn't have a system where it only gave to a few while the rest of the people starved. You weren't a good leader unless your people be. That's actually still is how it is today, even though we do have the odd corrupt chief. So, and that's the part of history where you hear about the death marches and bashing babies' brains up against the trees to kill them. Custard was really well known for doing that, and cutting the breasts off nursing women. And this continued for 150 so years. While the rest of America and Canada were developing in, 1930s, 40s, 20s, still going on. And then the last part, which most people are aware of, is the part where the residential schools started. So basically what happened is, I call it the big churches. So the Protestant and Catholic, and they sat down with the governments at the time and said the government had an idea, which was they would build these churches, these beautiful giant buildings. Well, let's just use Alberni, British Columbia as an example. Here in Canada, they would build these beautiful giant buildings and call them schools, and the churches would run them. And for that, they gave the Catholic Church thousands and thousands of acres in British Columbia, Canada. Beautiful, pristine. They built the church a giant sawmill for logging. That type of stuff. So that the churches all had money coming in. And what the job of the churches was pick up all the First Nations people, children, put them in these schools meaning they were really prison camps, and make sure that everybody outside, all the good colonizing white people, thought that those kids were learning to be civilized and educating them, when in fact they were being torn from their parents by gunpoint. And while they were in those schools, they were being sexually molested, abused, murdered. It was a horrible, horrible time, especially in Canadian history. And it was only recently here, like in the last couple decades, that it's even being taught in school about that part of our history. So there's a couple generations there that it was completely erased from history. And we were supposed to die off, but we didn't. And not only did we not die off, we became lawyers, doctors, and Indian chiefs. That's where that expression comes from. And we learned to use the government's laws against them. And that's where we're at today. So one of the big misconceptions is, when I laugh every time I see it, when you see all this shit all over the internet, that Alberta's going to separate from Canada because they're MAGA. Well, they cannot separate from Canada. That's an impossibility. I mean, they can leave. Don't let the door hit you on the way out. But Alberta doesn't own that land. That land is owned by the First Nations people. Now, if you want to sit in your government and say, okay, executive orders, like Donald Trump's like big with these executive orders, that land in Alberta, there are treaties, which is basically like an executive order or a lease or a bill put into signed bill, have went through 3 governments and never has that land ever been given to a to Canada. Nor was it given to the French, and nor was it given to British. So it's so funny, I mean, how much misinformation is out there. Because I love it when I go on, I see some 40-year-old man and he's all puffed out and he's all masculine and he's all, oh, fuck them, we're leaving Alberta, boo, 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 boo. That's never going to happen. He can leave Alberta. But Alberta's just staying exactly where it is until the chiefs get together and decide differently. And there's so many things that we have used over the years that you don't even realize comes off First Nations land. Oil is a big one. That comes off First Nations land. Diamonds, to bore diamond mine. There's all these minerals and stuff. They have to have meetings with chiefs. You don't see all that. You see when the Canadian government gets together with some other government, but you don't see the meetings behind closed doors. Because I don't know if you've noticed or not, but First Nations people don't feel the need to be on media all the time, on social media all the time, or to be the forefront. But that doesn't mean that the laws don't exist. So, my status card was not, I didn't receive my status card till I was, 10, 11, 12, early teens. And that status card is legal and binding, and it is like showing somebody's birth certificate. Now, I could copy strike that, but I'm not going to make a big deal about it because I'm the one who put it out in the first place. And I know, and I just didn't think that Audrey was that goddamn ignorant. I don't know how one person can act all the time like they're smart and be as stupid as she comes out and doesn't. She's an embarrassment to herself. But anyway, these days, well, a couple decades ago, Chuck and I used to be able to travel across the borders. All I had to have was my status card. All Chuck had to have was his driver's license. These days, you got to have a damn passport. But because I am First Nations, I am registered what would be the equivalent of your federal government. So you can't pretend or fake that card. There was a bunch of bullshit that came out about, what was her name, the famous singer who pretended to be First Nations, and she sang First Nations songs, Jody whatever. And, of course, stupid people, without knowing all the facts or understanding what status cards were, the media ran with the fact that she faked it. Well, she didn't fake that card. She might have faked being First Nations, but she did not fake that card because that card was given to her by a chief. It would be like the same as knighting somebody in England. It gives you certain privileges. So that's where they went on with me being pretendian, which is a lie. Now these days, all that card does is when I'm on reserve, I get cheap gas. I don't have to pay any taxes on gas. When I'm off reserve, I don't have to pay certain taxes. I still have to pay at the end of the year taxes, but sales tax and get certain things off like sales tax. It gives me the right. I can go live in America I can just cross that border, go over there, rent an apartment, and go to work. I have a social insurance number. And even before I had that status card, I also had my green card. I've had my green card since the 60s. But when I got my green card back then, it was very easy. And over the years, well, you see how immigration laws changed depending on what president comes in. So a while back, it was if you had stayed out of the country. So if you were living in the States, which I was, and I left the country, and the reason I left the United States and came back to Canada is because my mother was sick and she needed somebody to take care of her. So I came back and I ended up staying more than 6 months. And I lost my green card at that time due to that. I would have had to reapply. I probably could have reapplied and everything would have been okay. But I didn't need to because by that time I had my status card. So as Audrey likes to keep lying and using the Jenny Rhodes channel to continue her lies and bullshit, that's all they are. And the other thing I wanted to say is I caught some of Drunk Dur's bullshit last night, and I find it really interesting that she is stopping my name, which good. I'm glad to hear it. And if she's going to do that and stick with that, good for her. Anyway, I'll talk to y'all later. Have a good day. It's still dark here. Bye now.